Thanks for coming. I want to thank Taki, his wife, his dog, his crew, for putting on another incredible show. This is really, as you guys probably know, it's the only convention I go to close to home, and it's really the best. And it's an honor to be here, and really cool to see all the positive energy going around and crazy tattoos on people. So I thought a lot about what to do for this talk. And then decided, rather than hash over a lot of pictures and stuff that other people had seen before, pictures of tattoos, there's a few tattoos in it. But really I wanted to address the idea of the Black Panther, the crawling Black Panther tattoo design, which is one of the iconic components, as you all know, of classic 20th century American tattoo history. And it had a big impact on me as one of the most beautiful, powerful designs that I saw that was on a lot of people's arms when I was a little kid and learning to draw this stuff almost 60 years ago. And so I've kind of kept a collection of things over the years, and it's inspired a lot of my art. So this talk will be a few tattoos, but a whole lot of spin-offs and transformations of it. The first slide is from a book of world myths that a woman, Marie Schubert, wrote in, I believe, 1937. She drew the pictures for it and did all the text. It's a really fantastic compendium. My old friend Lance McLean in Hawaii discovered this book in a junk store in Honolulu in the late 70s and brought it up to a party at Mike Malone's house. And we were all on some kind of mild psychedelic and having a great time, and Lance walked in and said, "Look at this." And he opened that book, and it was just like the earth moved, man. We were like the original Black Panther, because nobody knew where it had come from in tattooing. And I don't know the first tattooer that obviously found this book, traced it up. The thing is just about the size of a small forearm tattoo in the original book. I kind of think that maybe Bill Grimshaw did it, because there's an early set of drawings of these panthers that has his signature next to him. Next slide. This is from the first tattoo time, where I tried to feature a whole lot of, to me, really important, powerful components about tattooing, including a piece, the first piece ever written on Sailor Jerry Collins, my mentor, and on Paul Rogers, who was a great, great person, and I was fortunate to know. And I wanted to do a thing. I put this together with Leo Zulueta, who wasn't even really tattooing at that time, or just starting, and this whole black graphic tattoo thing. And I thought, well, we'll do something on the panther. So I showed in the article a piece that I traced off an art historical book of a form that was kind of tigerish, pantherish, maybe even some dragon components from an ancient Chinese bronze. I think the basic form of this crawling animal dates back to things, Chinese work from dynasties that go back about 3,000 years. It's a really, really primal design. Next. This is a sheet that Milt Zeiss published, and somebody hand-colored some of this. The guy, Kurt Bruns, who had the sheet, he blacked out the Zeiss company's name on it. And this was the basic breakfast of tattooing, in the, not dated, but I think it's probably the late 1940s. I started seeing these tattoos in the early to mid 1950s. This skips forward to 1967, my first set of flash, and my version of it on there. I was using my second middle name, tattooing under Ed Talbot when I was just starting to tattoo under Phil Sparrow's tutelage and getting ready to open my first shop. Next. This was a tiger I painted up for my first shop in Vancouver. At Phil Sparrow's one day, a guy walked in and he had the panther design on his arm, but as a tiger, and he actually had gotten it at Bergrim's in Long Beach. I don't know who first came up with the idea for it there, maybe Bob Shaw, but when I saw that thing on the guy's arm, and I was inspired, as most of you know, to get into tattooing because I saw a book of Japanese tattoo designs the first time in Sparrows. But when I saw that panther done as a tiger, I was like, whoa, this is too cool. Suddenly it clicked that switch, like to take something that was really set and codified and do it a little different. And because I was so into Asian art and the mythology and all that of dragons and tigers, it really hit a nerve with me. And it was the first tattoo I got on my forearm. I took a pilgrimage down to Burt Grimm's where I'd hung out as a little kid, and this guy, Hong Kong Tom Yobins, put a little rose on my arm, and I could see how great he could tattoo, and I made the giant plunge, and like, I'm going to get one on my forearm, and I got the crawling tiger. So it's real dear to my heart. Next. This jumps 10 years, 1977, January 77. Mike Malone and Tom DeVita and a bunch of us were going up to the first real tattoo convention in Reno, Nevada. And Malone and I painted up a set of flash. And I've always been really interested in designs morphing into other things, and I'm interested in anthropomorphic stuff of inanimate things taking on qualities of humans, which I'll talk about at the end of this little slideshow. So I painted this one up as I called her Panthera, and I thought, well, this would be a million seller. I never got to put it on, but for 77, it was sort of different. Next. And then this jumps forward to 1985 when I began tattooing rockabilly guys. Actually, in 83, I tattooed in Japan doing traditional Japanese work in 1973 with Horihide Kazuo Oguri in Gifu City. I wasn't in Japan for 10 years. I came back in 83, a San Francisco friend that was on the rockabilly scene and hanging out with all these hipsters in Tokyo. He said, these guys want tattoos. And I said, no, they can have the Elvis haircuts. They can have all the gear. They can do this thing. They can do the dances. Tattoos are too forbidden in Japan. But I took my gear over there. I was going over to study with the great master, Horiyoshi II Nidaime, get a big tattoo started by him. And my friend Bob in San Francisco said, yeah, bring your gear. So I found out all these hipsters did want tattoos. And this was morphed off a thing that actually Bob Roberts drew when he was still tattooing underground in New York for a band called the Bloodless Pharaohs that were out of Long Island. And they changed their name to the Stray Cats. And he designed a panther head, or a cat head, with big cartoon eyes and a quiff. And it became their logo for that band. And then they went to England and hit it really big. But the Japanese guys got really into this thing about the giant waterfalls, the big quiffs. And as you can see, this guy grew a pretty killer one himself. So I was tattooing a lot of people for all through the 80s. I was going to Tokyo about 3 times a year and tattooing people with this kind of imagery, which was essentially a mashup of classic American tattoo imagery. And in America in those days, it was not popular. People weren't doing all this retro stuff at all. Everybody was trying to chase the Japanese bandwagon or the tribal bandwagon or the fantasy castle and wizard bandwagon. So the Japanese really got on it and appreciated the velocity of classic American tattooing and kind of drug it into a new era. Next. This is a watercolor I did when I started. I didn't really have, for 20 years I just tattooed. I was really busy, which was great, doing all this custom work and everything. But I didn't take any time for my own art. I had some time, but I spent a lot of time drinking and fucking around. So but I got a little handle on that and made a move to Hawaii. I started surfing again. And I thought, well, I can do my own art. So I started doing things that I realized didn't have to be for anybody. It was terrific that I got presented with all these insane, strange commissions that made up the body of highly unusual work that I got to do in the 70s, and early 80s. But I was pretty lost at sea when I started facing a blank piece of paper for myself. And I began doing these things where I didn't think about what I was going to do. I would sit down with a brush loaded and just start making an image and then make it up as I went. And so I began integrating some classic tattoo images in there. First, I tried to avoid that. I thought, well, I can't. If it's a tattoo image, that means it's my day job. I got to do something different. Then I realized that was just stupid because this stuff is so part of my DNA. So I began mixing things up, and this is a little scenario I did called A Christmas for Shacktown. It's just a dumb title from a Donald Duck comic that I had in 1953, but I was into Mexican retablos, and this is on mate paper, handmade Mexican paper, and again, there's no explanation for it. I started drawing the Panther Man, and I thought, well, he should be praying. There's a little landscape, and he's in this terrible little deserted room with waves coming in, and then he's got the butterfly nurse lady dragging the heart with the anchor, the standard thing. So, next. So I really, and then I was on a roll with doing this art because I had a lot of time when I would go to San Francisco and tattoo like hell for a couple of weeks, and I'd go back to Hawaii and paint like crazy and surf. So I started doing more and more of these odd things. And this was one I did in 1987, and there was a fantastic TV show which is available online called Crime Story. And it was Michael Mann's first TV series. It was before Miami Vice, and it was about a hard-hitting group of sort of lawless Chicago detectives battling these really stupid out there mafia types. It's a fantastic show. It was only on for 2 years. But these were the two protagonists in that show, Mike Torello, who's on top, it was a detective, and Ray Luca, this vicious, insane mafioso who had a big quiff in the thing. And I did them, the title was sort of Crime Story, as actors as Black Panther designs. This is a small piece. It's about 9 by 12. I think a guy that actually used to tattoo with Bob Roberts bought this, but I don't know where it is now. And then, okay, next. So that was 85, and then, 87. And then in 88, I was really on a roll with doing the watercolors, and this is one I called the Black Panther. I don't even have the whole title here. I think it's Black Panther rips the veil of illusion from the face of beauty. And I just love doing that panther. There's something about it, the flow of it, and the black shading, which I never could get right. I never had a system. When I was in the shop tattooing sailors and Marines, every time I do a panther, I do a little different because I never figured out exactly how to shade it right. I still don't know how. Sometimes I leave a little, like in this one, there's a little like highlight down one side, but sometimes the highlight's down the spine. These are the kinds that you lose sleep over at night when you don't have anything better in your brain. But it's true. It's just, with a lot of things, I have a codified way to do it. And the panther somehow just eludes me. It's like Quicksilver. Next. This is another one from that same year, in 1988. My friend Ron Nagle, who's a great ceramic sculptor, bought this a couple of years ago at a big museum show I had in San Francisco. It's called Nobody Likes Surprises. And I started doing this. I thought, well, I'm going to mix a panther up with the Rose in No Man's Land. And so I started with him and then got in. And then I thought, well, I have this rose coming out of a weird, it could be like a skin mountain or something with a crown of thorns around it. But as I was painting it, I get these little stories going in my head. You know how that goes. And I thought, well, when I finished it, I thought it's either like the panther wakes up and he's trapped and he's like in nurse drag, in this situation, in this barren hillock, and he's pissed, obviously. Or it's like a doughboy, World War I soldier, and he's in the trenches and he's in the hospital and he comes out of delirium and the nurse bends over him and it's not the nurse, it's a Black Panther. Next. So I have a lot of fun doing these, you can see. This was, okay, in 1990, I started loosening up and doing some big works on paper and then on canvas and different things, just exercises. And this is about, I think these things are about maybe 40 inches high and maybe 3 feet by, they're pretty big, just quickie, it's a 5-minute painting with ink and watercolor. And this one I called the Egg Panther. I was doing a bunch of variants. Next. This one I called Classical Panther. It kind of reminds me of like a marble bust or something, Next. This is the Pink Panther, as I sort of thought of like a, kind of lighthearted guy from the Castro Street there with a butch and pale blue eyes, And then the next one. And this one, I thought it'd be the mouth and the claw marks are kind of a sick sort of magenta, and I just titled this one. I write the titles on the back when I finish, and these were all done in the same day or week or something. This one is titled Yellow Panther Mean Danger. It's like sort of like a bad pigeon, from some kind of like jungle movie or something. That the guide warns the guy that's out there in the pith helmet, looking to kill everything in the jungle. Okay, next. And this is a tattoo. I still, done some tattoos of panthers. This is from 1991. This is my friend from Los Angeles, Don Pugsley, who's a writer and an actor. He's played a lot of great character roles. And I knew Pugsley from the 70s. He came to realistic. He had a big Cliff Raven-like dragon up on one, like a half sleeve and a chest thing. And I did maybe another dragon on the other side. And he and I hit it off. He's got a really sardonic sense of humor. And he started talking about he had a bunch of stuff on him. And then he said, I want to get a back piece, but he sort of prides himself on being like a rough, tough American guy. He was a Green Beret medic, and he's an intelligent guy, but he likes to play a lot of the sort of meathead, roles with his take on things. And I don't want all that Japanese shit, I don't want all these guys are getting this stuff, and I want something American, an American back piece. Finally came up with the idea. He said, I want to do a panther. I want to do a tattoo that if somebody's driving by on the freeway, going on the 5 or something, and they're doing 60, and you're walking down the street on the sidewalk next to there, and they look over and they know what that tattoo is. It isn't like that person has a bunch of, what is it on him? So we call it the Freeway Panther. It's like a highly visible tattoo. And it was crazy doing the tattoo because Pugsley had all these moles on his back, and when it was very boring plugging all that black in, and I'd be working on it. He's a big guy, and I'd be looking across his back, and it was like this weird like skin firmament, like these little like mole stars in there, and I'm trying to get the black in, and I have no idea how well this held in. All these photos, you know, these famous photos of my tattoos when they're really fresh, so they look good. But as a lot of you know, I didn't get the ink in as good as a lot of people, but I had a lot of ideas to get out, and I was, you know, that's what it was. But I liked this piece. It was a lot of fun to do it. I did a couple of different versions, one with more of a shoulder and claw, but we blew up the head a little bit more and got to this. Okay, next. This is probably one of the key images that I came up with from who knows where. Also 1991, that was a really fertile period for me. And I just called this a Panther Rose mix-up. And it's a sheet, I usually keep it up at Tattoo City. Maybe it's still up there now. It's like about 7 by 15 inches. And I painted it in Honolulu, actually with a B5 pen outlining. It's on board. And Malone came over and he saw that thing and said, well, he said, you better let everybody know that you did this thing because everybody's going to copy this. And I went, well, yeah, it's kind of cool. And then it became, you know, like a category, I guess. And it's been fantastic for me to see people latch onto it. It isn't just the things that it's the relationships of these essential forms, because tattooing, art to me, is like a language, a visual language that's entirely separate from what it's supposed to be about, of what the nominal topic of it is. It's putting things together in a way that hit people, that you can't just say, oh, it's a panther and a rose, or it's a vase of flowers, or it's a mythological scene. It has to summon up some strange, you know, vibration, for lack of a better word, of things that haunt you, that it's different every time you look at it, that you never can quite figure it out. That to me is what I'm interested in, is art. I'm not interested in art that you go, okay, great, I get it, you know, or I get that story and it's an in-joke and it's all these things. But this thing really kicked a door open for me mentally and influenced a lot of the rest of my work, so I've hung on to that one. Next. That same year, I think it was 1991, that I opened a street shop again in North Beach, opened Tattoo City, which was a second incarnation, the one that burned down in the Mission, that was only open for about 8 months in 1977, 78, when I first met Jack and Charlie and those guys. And this was a logo I did for the shop and the business card, another kind of mashup, panther with wings and a sacred heart and then a hand, you know, and the eye and all that. So that was the kind of tip I was on then. Next. This was another big, I continued some series of those loose ink drawings on big sheets of paper, but this is 2 years later. This is from 92. And I called this one Bionic Panther. I was trying to just, again, I never have ideas usually when I sit down. I'm trying to sit down and relax and open up the vents and then surprise myself. But this time I thought, well, I could do a panther like with stupid riveted plates, you know, and then a really dumb like claws just stuck in there like some, you know, metal shop project in high school. Next. This one I like. I don't know where it came from. I called it Grim Necessities. That was also 1992. I think it played off from when I was a little kid. You'd see pictures of people in iron lungs, and I can't even remember whether that was for polio or it was for. And it scared the shit out of me when you're a little kid and you see there's some character in a TV show or there's a documentary and there's some little kid your age and he's in an iron lung. And you're like, oh my God, I hope I don't end up in the lung. And so this panther is somehow got some life-threatening thing, and he's got a little mirror, like when they have him in the lung, they'd be upside down, and so they could like talk to people that were in the room. So I think that's where this came from. Again, it was drawn with a B5 speedball and spit shaded, and it's about 16 by 20, something like that. Next. This is a lousy photo of a triptych that I did right around that same time, 1992. I was invited to give a talk. I connected with some people that were buying the Tattoo Times. I began to realize that they were having an impact on the academic or, you know, cultural community. And a really hip teacher, Davey Damkoller at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, wrote me. And he had a couple little tattoos, but he really appreciated tattooing and understood the whole thing. And he said, I'm using your book as like a textbook in my class. I was, wow. And he wrote, and I thought, Green Bay, and I'd never really been to the Midwest. So I told my wife, I said, you know, I wonder if I wrote that guy and said, well, I do lectures sometimes, maybe they'd bring me back there. And not so much I wanted to see Green Bay, Wisconsin, but I would probably have to fly through Chicago and I could see the Chicago Art Institute, which has an insane, great art collection of the kind of art I care about. And sure enough, they invited me. And when I was up in Green Bay, and I told those people, yeah, I was a printmaker, I got my degree in that. And they said, why don't you make a lithograph while you're here? So they had a room set up, and I was in there like an hour and a half, and they had these big lithostones. And I drew this triptych, each one's about that big. I drew a triptych, and then I did one other single thing. But I just did the black, and then they etched them, and they editioned them, and this was a hand-colored thing. And we have this over at my studio still. And again, I started out again with a panther, and I put sort of a rough collar, like a Shakespearean era thing. Just whatever occurred to me, right? Just doing this, and I linked it. I thought, well, I'll do a triptych. I did the waves. I did all this other crazy stuff. The little Cyclops angel, which was, pretty Higgs influenced, and he, warped my mind the years that we were working together there. So it was again the panther, but I don't have a really good photo of this thing. But anyway, it was an important piece for me. Next. And this was the same trip I did that, and this is hand colored. I actually did another one of a whole bunch of panther claws, just making red, blood claw marks down the paper, and I couldn't find that. But this was Veterano, I called this one, like the guy's been through a lot. Next. And then around that time, everything exploded for me because when I was in Chicago, I met this guy, Tony Fitzpatrick, who was very influenced by tattooing and carnival art and popular culture. He's an incredible, super, super energized artist, and was actually had a bunch of my books and was bagging tattoo designs out of those for his artwork. And he was selling his art for a lot of money. He was in good galleries. And he started a gallery in Chicago that he actually called World Tattoo. And he didn't have any tattoos at the time, but he dug what it was about. So it gave me an opportunity to start showing again. And he said, you want to make some etchings? He'd got a master printer working with him. And Tony didn't really know anything about etching, but he had this guy that was super, super printer, a great printmaker, Steve. And so I went in, and I had made etchings since I left Art Institute in '67. That was my major, and I knew a lot about it and knew how to do it. But it was great working with a master printer. This is the first one I did. And this one is called, I'll do a panther. It's like when in doubt, I'll start with a panther and then draw from there. And I just developed this thing on a plate, and then I titled it, it's when we were kids and we, snotty teenage boys, and there were a lot of jokes about like books with certain titles. You'd make up books, and this was titled after one of those, and that joke was, the book is The Tiger's Revenge by Claude Balls. So this is the panther, and he's got an envelope with like a lip print on the back, which I got into when my wife and I were first separated from when I went to Japan with Oguri, and she'd write me every day, and she'd kiss the envelope, and it was like, well, it's so 50s, And so anyway, there's the panther, and there's the nuts hanging down, and the shark threatening him, and the lightning and everything. He's in a bad way. He's clawing his way out of the sky. Next. And this was a great piece of my friend Brian in Chicago, who's a fantastic painter. Brian Wells. He's not a tattooer, but he's got some of the craziest tattoos. He was one of the first people with a high art sensibility that wanted something really different. And he wanted to get, it's a trope off a very famous artwork that was done in the early 50s called the Erase De Kooning, where, and I always get this wrong, I think maybe it was Robert Rauschenberg wanted to do a conceptual thing. At that time, Willem de Kooning had become really, really famous, like maybe the most famous painter in the world. And Rauschenberg got a drawing from him that he erased until it just had a few tiny traces on the paper, high art conceptual stuff. So Brian wanted an erased tattoo, and he wanted something really, iconic, a classic design. So I said, well, then, the panther, and then I made him erase. I said, you erase it. I did the drawing, and then I put it on in pretty verbatim. And he's had a lot of fun with it over years, and he's a really, really deadpan guy, real deadpan delivery. And he goes into tattoo shops and starts talking or something, and he'll go, well, I have some Ed Hardy tattoos. And they go, oh, really? Yeah, let's see. And then he'd pull up his sleeve and go, I don't know what went wrong, man. So that was good for Brian. Okay. Next. This was one from, so the Erased Panther was 93. This is from 93. And I had it up at Tattoo City. And the first time I met Chris Trevino, he was out for a tattoo and bought this one up. It was on a piece of illustration board, 15 by 20. And it was my first notion to do, panther sharks, like hybrid things, with a goofy mermaid. Again, all these things were just, I'm sure I started out with her face and hair, but no drawing on the surface or no thinking, you know what I mean? I like that challenge of it, right? And it's not like a tattoo you screw up. If you screw it up, you throw away the paper. But I had fun with this one, The Sea Around Us. That was the name of a very, very famous book about ecology in the oceans that was written in the 1950s. A lot of these titles for things come from books that I've seen or know about, or famous artwork, or crazy songs. It always adds it to me and adds to the mystery to me. Nobody really knows what it means. Next. This thing was really fun to do. Again, after starting to make prints again, now this jumped to 1995, and I actually began making prints then at the invitation of Paul Maloney to work with him in Japan on intaglio etchings with, mixed media combination of classical etching techniques, which was fantastic. And this outfit he worked for had good funding, and they brought Francesca and I over for 2 weeks, and I made a whole suite of really complicated color intaglio prints. But around that same time, I met Bud Shark, who's a master printer up in Colorado. He was in Hawaii having a show of prints that he'd produced with a bunch of artists. And so we went up there, and I did this set of lithographs. And the first one I did, I thought, well, once again, when in doubt, I'll do the big Black Panther. So this was what came out of that, and I called it Big Top. Got a little crown flying off him, and I just, for something different, but totally to change the mood of it, I put these two little cartoon kids, kind of in the style of Little Lulu comics, which I was big on when I was a kid, Lulu and Tubby. So they're there, maybe trying to ignore the menace of the panther. Okay, next. This was a print that I did with Paul a few months prior to going in Boulder. That was a real 1-2 punch that year, because I went to Japan, did all this knockout stuff. A few months later, I'm up in Colorado and Boulder for about 3 weeks. But this was an intaglio print with a whole lot of plates. Paul had a great crew of guys, and we really worked their asses off there. Paul had actually told me, he says, all these Japanese guys that were, super hard workers, super dedicated, masters of their thing, and they're going, oh, this American guy's coming in, and he figured I'd be kind of not up to speed with the way things are done in Japan, but we taught them a lesson and did these really complicated prints. And this is a takeoff. It's called Blue Boy Gets Physical. And this one I think I did a prep drawing for this and then transferred it to the plate of this figure. But it's based on a famous thing from the Water Margin epic, which was set in maybe 13th century China. That's a basis for a whole lot of the ukiyo-e, the Japanese prints that make up the heroes in Japanese tattooing that Kuniyoshi and all those guys did. This book was translated into Japanese in the 1820s. Hokusai did a version, and a lot of the characters in that book were tattooed, and it set the stage for the tattoo rage in Edo, in Tokyo in the old days, in the early 19th century. And there's a scene in there where there's one of these guys who's disguised as a priest, and he's hiding up in a mountain temple, one of these bandits. And he gets disgusted with being in hiding and gets drunk, and he goes and wrecks a temple. So he's busting apart. Instead of a temple, I made it all these kind of torii gates that are sacred entryway things at Shinto shrines in Japan. And to me, it was signified like breaking through tradition. And then I wanted to tattoo this guy up with all this Americana stuff, kind of portrait of my mother-in-law on his belly, and sailing ships. He's got a elephant on his knee and going down the shin. Sailor Jerry had an elephant head there. And then I gave him the panther head, and he's holding the scroll, the secret scroll of the ninja secrets. And he's got blonde hair like Gorgeous George, who was a famous wrestler in the 1950s. My grandmother was addicted to wrestling shows on TV, and I used to watch a lot of those. And so this was like probably one of the biggest mashups of essential things that I came up with. And at the bottom, I just wanted compositionally to put something else in, so I put a couple of linear swallows, and then this shining block of something down below there. I don't even know what it is, but it's a print I'm really, really fond of, and I got one left, and it was really proud to do that with Paul. It's fantastic working with him, and as you guys probably all know, he's doing great, great prints with a lot of people here and great tattooers now in America. It's cool to see it all mixed up, the printmaking and the tattooing. Next. It's just a shot of a tattoo. It was from that big top print. I put this on a woman who was really into banner painting and stuff. I can't remember her name in the Midwest. I did this 95, same thing, the same year as Blue Boy Gets Physical. Next. It's just a colored pencil drawing when I got into doing that series, 1996, kind of morphing the panther into an anchor. He's turning into that. A little bit of everything. Next. This was a rib piece for a Japanese guy, somebody that I tattooed in Tokyo, and he came over to get a piece. It was we were still in the original Tattoo City location on Columbus, and he got this done, and it was his recipe. He wanted these elements in it exactly to stick, well, the main things, and then, and he wanted the spread beaver shot on the bottom and all this stuff, and it was like on his rib. I think I did a big, pretty traditional tiger on his other rib. Somewhere I have a photo of it. Next. This was a thing I did in Colorado when Bud Shark first moved from Boulder up to Lyons, Colorado, up in the Rockies more. And he just had the studio set up, and I was out there just kind of hanging out and visiting. So why don't you draw a plate? So I drew this spur of the moment, and I call it Rocky Mambo. It's kind of the Rocky Mountains in the background, and it's this panther with some kind of mystical crown on, and he's conjuring up out of this box of like an igloo in a black cloud. Who knows why? Next. This was a back piece of the Panther Rose Mix-Up 2001, and I had done another version of this that I completely forgot about, and then somebody showed me a photo the other day on a guy's, like a back of a leg. It could even be on Richard Stell or somebody. I can't remember all that, but it was cool, and I got to do this back piece. It was fun kind of revisiting that. Thank you. Thanks. This was a series in Japan. The original people that discovered me for the Ed Hardy brand were a LA guy, white guy from LA, and a Japanese guy, and they had a business of making sort of hip casual clothes with quasi-Asian images. And they saw an article about my painting and talked me into doing some stuff with them. And then Tatsu, my original partner in the thing, got me to Japan. He wanted me to work with traditional Japanese craftspeople doing really, really traditional stuff, but with my crazy imagery. So I made several trips to Arita, Japan, down in Kyushu, where they began doing porcelain 400 years ago. It was a fantastic environment to work in, and they would have a room with just hundreds of pieces of greenware-fired clay pieces, and I just go in and go, this is a cool shape, and take it into the next room and start glazing it. So this is part of that, and this was a vase I did on one of their classic shapes with a blindfolded panther. Next. And there's a little bird flying over the top to add an element, and the blindfold has hearts on it. And this particular look of a vase with a piece of cloth over it, I took from one of my favorite Ming Dynasty painters, Chinese painter. That I saw a still life that he painted that had this vase with a cloth tied around it. I don't know if it was a standard thing then or not, but I really liked the look of it. And again, imitating stuff, it's like, it's a vase, but it's got a piece of cloth. It's not really a piece of cloth. It's glazed, and it's got a panther. And it's all those, trying to just keep it mysterious, Next. This is a lousy shot of a piece that I totally forgot I had, and I found this in my JPEG file, and then came to find out to my horror, the thing got lost somehow. It's on a piece of silk. It's a photograph of this. I did a vase of the Panther Rose mix-up. I did a panther on one side. It's sort of a 3 views. On the other side, it's the roses, and on the third side, it was the fusion of them. And the vase in Japan is about that big. I still have it. But with David Salgado down at Trillium, where I'm doing a whole lot of these mixed media things, Trevor has a bunch of them there at our booth with the cast things and that. It was my first experience working with digital stuff, being able to replicate endlessly. Take an image I did of this thing that was a 3D thing. We take a shot of it. We do it as a digital print, bring it up, and then lay it onto this piece of silk, and then I painted into that with oil paint. And this was my idea of like the ultimate of the panther claw marks, right? Turning into fireworks going off into space. I should show DeVita this thing, because DeVita, when I first knew him, maybe not right away, Tom and I met in 73. I started tattooing him in 73 or 72. And And then he would do these panthers on people's arms. You know the story. All his tattoos in his place for $30, everything. And down in this terrible neighborhood in the Lower East Side was tough. But he'd do these panthers, and then he'd do these giant claw marks. He'd say, see, I fill up the whole arm with that. You know, $30 the guy gets that. So this is kind of my take on the panther claw mark going insane. Next. Okay, this was a setup, and the fireworks vase was done in 2007, which I think was about the year that I actually made the vase. This was a show in 2010 at the Laguna Beach Museum down near where I grew up in Southern California. And they were going to do an art shack show for the summer and invited all these artists to build their idea of a shack, of like a little studio you'd make stuff in. And I'd created a couple of versions of fake little tattoo shops. The first one for Track 16 Gallery in LA, my first show there. So I decided to change this one up, and I called it the Tat Cat Shack. So it's all Panthers. It was all one theme. And this is a friend of mine took this, Sharon Marshall from Costa Mesa, ace photographer, and took this shot showing the whole thing with a really super wide range camera. So it's some of those crazy big ink drawings of the Panthers, but then we hung scrims of, I did scans of my old Panther stencils from when I was street tattooing, and then printed them on these just clear Mylar sheets. So we had the paintings up on the wall, and then we had the Mylar sheets over them, so you're looking at them through all these Panthers. And then those are proofs in the back area of the big top. The ones on right and left are the big top, the red plate litho before the stuff was in. Next. This is a scrim with all the Panther things. Next. This is a close-up, and I put that's my original power pack on the desk, my ICO transformer that I bought when I was learning with Phil Sparrow. I had that since '67, and we set it up with a sponge and bucket and wanted to really make it like a 20s thing. And then I made scans of some really old tattoo signs that I have from the 20s and that to put in there. But it was a cool setup. It was a little 8 by 10 inch thing that you'd walk into and surrounded with these Panthers. Next. That's a better shot where you can see the scrims over it, the old stencil cabinet setup. Next. And then we installed the dummy rail with the chicken wire over it, which I'd used this was one from the first little fake tattoo shop I did at Track 16 Gallery in Santa Monica in 1997 when I had my first big show there. And it was constructed within the gallery as an 8 by 10 foot space. And I painted this dummy rail, and then I decided to seal it off with a chicken wire because I wanted the feeling of when I was a really little kid. My mother drove us back to Iowa a couple of times where she was from, and you drive across the desert and you'd see these signs to keep your interest, 10 miles ahead, two-headed snake, out in the middle of nowhere. And you'd see these pathetic, sad little museums, right, by the roadside with oddities. And they always had the things like behind chicken wire and some poor animal behind there. And so I like that idea of like this weird, scary little setup. So, and also you couldn't really get to the tattoo area. It was not only a dummy rail you couldn't reach over, but you're walled off with the chicken wire. Next. Okay, that was from 2010, and that same year I started going back to doing like freeform Panthers on big pieces of paper. This is on watercolor paper. This is ink and a little bit of watercolor. And again, these were spontaneous with my usual kind of Japanese brushes and stuff. But with ink, I've been working in acrylic so much, when I get back to ink, I realize the fluidity of it, the freedom of it is so great. And of course the fades, the spit shade thing is really comes out great, because the ink is just so vibrant that way. I call this one Big Kisser. Next. These are about like that high. I think I did a few. This I called Futurist Panther. It kind of reminded me of a bunch of these Italians, Marinetti and some of these guys around World War I, 1920, called themselves the Futurists, and they were trying to figure out ways to do paintings that would show things in motion. So one of them, the famous one, was a dog being walked, and he's like, you can see all the legs and stuff. It was trying to capture mobility within a static canvas. So this Futurist Panther reminded me of some of the warp outs that they did. Next. This one's called Jealous Guy. Multiple eyes. Next. This one's You Mean Me, giving you that dead-eye look of death, Next. And this is a crack-up, where it just kind of everything comes apart. And like I say, I was telling somebody earlier today, I'm big on themes and symbolism and topics and stories and all that, but all of it to me is just an excuse to make a picture, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. And a lot of what I find links things up in my head are similarities of form and structure, not in a real, I'm not like Mr. Science, I am analytical, because once I start doing it, and then my muscle memory, because I've drawn so many millions of things, kicks in, and I'm like, oh yeah, I need sort of a hard-edged form there, to balance all this mush, stuff going on. But it's really, it just gets to, I also was telling these guys earlier, I found a quote recently by Su Shi, who was I think a 16th century poet, Chinese poet, and he was writing about art, and his statement, which I loved, was that anyone who looks at a painting and cannot get beyond the subject matter of what it is, of how true it is, what it resembles, is looking at it like the eyes of a child. It's all these things. My favorite phrases from the Carney world. It's just a way to get them into the tent, to get people's attention, get them off the midway of distraction, and go in and go, what's this, man? And show them something that they haven't seen before. And for me, making art that way is really, I don't have a program. It's not like I was ever an analytical cubist or anything like that. I am obsessed with art history, and it's a thing that really, most of my reading is either like noir pulp fiction or super arcane art history, because it feeds me, looking at all this stuff. But these things of trying to break myself out of patterns, break myself out of, I'm just going to do this thing again, which you can do it, and it's great to have that facility, but then it's pretty fun to go jump off the diving board and see what happens, which many of you in this room today are doing that beyond anything I ever could have dreamed of. I'm so fucking thrilled to see the level to which tattooing has advanced or risen, or it's unbelievable. And it's just like, when you see somebody doing something that you love and put your whole life into, and then take it to the next stages, it's extremely gratifying. And I really appreciate what everybody's doing that's doing it today. And I'm so glad I don't have to compete anymore, next. And then I did a series of Panthers in 2011. The ink drawings were 2010. 2011, these are pretty big things. Again, I think these are maybe ink or maybe all acrylic. And I showed a bunch of these in Chicago. This is my studio with a mess. Next. And this is one I like pretty much, because I just somehow thought, well, I had him just outlined for a while and thought, well, he's just a straight thing. And then I thought, I'll put the ghosty red dagger in. And just trying to keep it really minimal. And then decided to put that, I'm sure there's a word for that kind of fabric, pattern, that design. But it was sort of fun to mix that in, because I'd never done anything like that. And then next. So this is essentially the last real slide. This is from that same series. And it's kind of a self-portrait. All these works of art for me are like kind of self-portraits. And I loved a phrase that Zeke Owen said one time. Zeke's a great, great visionary tattooer. He certainly was in his prime, And I had the good fortune to work with him and fight with him and, be pissed off at each other and love each other. And this guy was a genius, man. When we paired up, I first got to work with him when I was just out of the gate. 1968, I worked for him in Seattle, and then we worked together in San Diego. One time in San Diego, we were talking, no, this was past San Diego, when he was tattooing Marines. He went back to North Carolina, and I was doing all this high pyrotechnic, crazy work. And he said, I'm just really grateful to do work on Marines and do them the best job that I can possibly do. And he'd done thousands of those, And he said, the way I look at it is when I do that bulldog with a DI cover, and that guy's out walking around the world somewhere, and he said, and it's really me looking out of that bulldog's eyes at whoever's looking at the tattoo. And that's what it is your work is imbued with your spirit, and then the person's carrying it. And it's the same way with the art. You're looking at these things, and I usually can't, I certainly can't remember why I did a lot of this stuff, and sometimes I don't even remember I did it. If you find it in the work piles, or you go in the studio the next day and go, wow, man, geez, where'd that come from? You know, it's like you're in the trance state, which is really why this stuff's valuable to me. But that's, anyway, the title of this one's The Crack Up. No, that's not The Crack, this is Out of Time. And I am going to read a little bit more stuff to you and show you one last picture, but I'm out of time. I'm trying to keep this, we're under an hour. I'm going to get you out of here in an hour. Because I got thinking about this morning and thinking about the Panther and what I've been trying to articulate about forms. And I'm really interested in that idea of anthropomorphic stuff. And thanks to the genius of Google now, I knew what it meant. It's like imbuing animals or something with human characteristics, you know. Oh, my dog, you know, he really knows what we're saying, you know, this kind of things. And I love dogs, but I thought, well, I'm going to look up anthropomorphism. And it came up, you know, in the Google thing as an attribution of human form or other characteristics to anything other than a human being. Examples including depicting deities with human form, ascribing human emotions to forces of nature, like hurricanes or earthquakes. It has ancient roots as a literary device in storytelling and also in art. And it's traditional fables with anthropomorphized animals which can stand or talk like humans. And we do this all the time with stuff in a lot of the tattoo stuff, a lot of stuff in the legends that we love that fuels, for me, especially Asian imagery, is these really magical, these things that are, you know, you can communicate with in a sense, that you're projecting that on them, or the way that they look speaks to us in a certain way. The word really was first used in the mid-1700s, comes from the Greek. And then beyond that, I found this thing on Therianthropy, which I'd never seen. And that refers to metamorphosis of humans into animals. They change forms via shape-shifting. This is big in a lot of cultures. Coyote myths and, you know, Native American things and all that. And this is, it says Therianthropes have long existed in mythology. They appear in ancient cave drawings. Who knows what those people were thinking about. Comes from the Greek again. And it's also used to describe spiritual belief in animal transformation. It says one source, in 1915, one source raised the possibility the term may have been used in the 16th century in criminal trials of suspected werewolves. And the last link on it was about skinwalkers and Nagwals. This was in Native American legends about skinwalkers, persons with a supernatural ability to turn into any animal they desire, to be able to transform. It says, but first they must be wearing a pelt of the animal. And they're talking about, in the Nahual culture, Mesoamerica, below Mexico, people that magically turn into animal forms. Says including animals such as the jaguar and puma, like the Black Panther. And what hit me when I saw this stuff, just at breakfast this morning, I was trying to figure out how to wrap this deal up. Totally confused you guys. But the thing is, you know, this thing of relationships, of like things sort of fueling, essential energy, fueling everything in the world, which is, to me, the basis of all this, like Taoist thought, which is the big ism I'm really into, you know, ancient Chinese stuff. But this kind of, I started thinking, well, tattoos, you know, I've always thought of them as amulets, especially when I talk to what I would call civilians, like, oh, tattooing, how interesting. Why do people do that? And you're going, well, have you got 18 hours? And I'll tell you. But, you know, we get these things as that we relate to and that are kind of, you know, psychic armor. This is all the skin bite stuff, or sure, sound bite stuff I develop for all these interviews I do. But there's some that empower us in some way, or make us feel better about ourselves, or that we're, you know, it's like it adds to your life. And I mean that in the best possible way. And this is hard to convey to somebody that doesn't have a clue why in the fuck anybody would get a tattoo. And that's their loss, you know, whatever, it's not for everybody. But that thing of saying this thing, I'm reading this like skinwalkers and transforming into animals, and that whole thing, whether it's just a romantic conceit, it's really special. And I'm really grateful that for whatever crazy reason this form chose me, you know, when I was a little kid, and just took me over. And the way it's all gone, and as I say, the way it's developed now and what everybody's doing with it. So we're kind of, we're walking storyboards, obviously, and we're walking, you got a little dragon energy, you got a panther energy, you got a, some dopey personal symbol, but it's all really important. And I think that it's become, I think tattooing is the most significant thing, characteristic of our species for the late 20th and early 21st century, because as we know, there's more of it being done now everywhere than there ever was, ever in history. And it's been seized on and like reclaimed after a lot of repressive thought systems that tried to make people feel bad about it and guilty and everything else, feeds you a bunch of guilt about the way you want to live. You're not hurting anybody else. They're your tattoos, they're nobody else's. And I think that we're linked in a good way to something that's really, really positive and is just, it's pretty fantastic. I'll give you the last slide, which is our, this is our commercial. My autobiography came out this summer after about 3 years of work. It's got a lot of the crazy stories in it. I told you here, a lot of other things. A lot of you read it, but I had fun doing it with my friend Joel Selvin, who was like the pop music critic for the San Francisco paper for 40 years. It was his idea, and we had a hell of a time doing it. I was really honored to get a lot of these stories in and give props to a lot of the people that helped me, be what I've become, and I could never have done it without them. And then I had a big exhibition in China last month, and I took over 30 paintings, and we did a catalog for that, bilingual. A lot of these are very crazy, quasi-abstract things, and it's all my therapy art. It's stuff I did since the year 2000, since the Big Dragon Scroll. So we've got the books at the booth. I can answer some questions if you guys want to do that, and I really appreciate you listening. And this is going to be recorded. If it was a little hard to follow, you can waste some time looking at it online. Thank you.